In this video, we'll be looking at the very basics of color correction and color grading. Now, while we'll be working in Davinci Resolve, you can use these same techniques in Premiere Pro and Final Cut. All right, if you're ready, let's get started. This is Studio McKay. All right, once you have Davinci Resolve opened and you've started a new project, this is the window that you're going to be greeted with. You will be in the Cut page of Davinci Resolve. This is where we can import all of our media and get things organized. First, I'm just going to create a new bin called Video. This is where we'll be putting all of our video clips that we're going to be color grading today. Double click on it to open it up. And now I'm just going to import all of my media. Drag and drop. And here I'm just going to press Do Not Change. What this is asking is if we want to change the project settings to match the settings of our video clips. I have my project set the way I want, so I don't want to change that. Now that we've got all of our video clips in here, in our video folder, we can come back out and we can add more folders if we want to add music or things like that. But today we'll be focusing on color grading, so we're not going to worry about any of the editing features in here. Let's go into our video folder. From here, we're going to come down to the edit page. Click to enter the edit page, and now we can select the clips that we want to enter into the timeline. Let's scroll down, and I want to choose this clip. And I want to pick this clip. We've got quite a bit of greens. Let's choose this one. Now we'll enter the color page by clicking on this little color wheel icon down here. All right, now once we open up the color page, this is what it will look like. We've got our 3 clips down here. We can select each one to view and make adjustments to the clips. Down here in this bottom area of the screen are all of our color grading tools. Now, since this is the basics of color correction, we're not going to be talking about keyframing, scopes, or any sort of advanced color grading. We're just going to be focusing on basic color correction and very basic color grading. Let's take a look at our image. This image looks fairly flat and desaturated. There's not a lot of color, and we can tell that there's not a lot of contrast. His hair should be darker, the highlights should be brighter, and it overall looks kind of muddy. What can we do to fix that? Well, down here, let's click on this color wheel icon right here. This is where we're going to get our basic color controls. In here, we've got our lift, our gamma, gain, and offset color wheels, and then we've got a set of sliders underneath each of them. The lift controls the color in the darker parts of the image, the gamma controls the color in the moderate parts of the image, and the gain controls the color in the bright areas of the image. And our offset controls the overall color of everything in the image. Under each of these color wheels are sliders for the brightness of each of the areas that they control. For instance, the lift slider down here controls the brightness and darkness of the darkest parts of the image. You can click this little reset arrow right here to reset the adjustment. The gamma slider controls the brightness and darkness of the midtones of the image. Let's reset that. And same thing for the gain, except this is with the highlights and bright areas of the image. And with the offset, we can control the overall brightness or darkness of the image. Again, let's reset that. Up here at the top, we've got our temperature slider, which introduces more warm orange colors into the image or more blue cool colors into the image. Let's reset this by double clicking, putting a 0, press enter. And same thing with this slider. We can drag to the right to introduce magenta. We can drag to the left to introduce green. Let's set this to 0. Our contrast dial right here allows us to introduce more contrast into the image or take away contrast from the image. Let's set this to 1 as its default. Our pivot right here controls where our contrast originates from. So if we want to add some contrast, let's add a generous amount, and then we'll control the pivot. We can choose whether the contrast originates from the shadows and pushes the details toward the highlights, or we can choose the contrast to originate from the highlights and push more details toward the shadows. Our midtone detail dial over here allows us to add more clarity to the image or reduce clarity. Down here on the bottom, we've got color boost, shadows, highlight, sat, hue, and luma mix. For the most part, we're not going to be worried about these. We just want to cover saturation, since this controls the overall saturation of the image. Let's put that back to 50. Color boost, which is similar to vibrance. Let's set that back to 0. Now that we've got the basic understanding of these controls, let's start color correcting this image. Now, all of the adjustments we make will be contained within this node. This icon right here represents the original image. This node contains the effects that are being applied to the image, and this icon over here represents the final image after the effects are applied. We can create multiple nodes by pressing Option S on a Mac or Alt S on a Windows computer. And now I've got 2 nodes. Why would you want to have more than one node? Well, this can help you separate color correction from color grading. Let's label this one color correction by right-clicking on it and select Node Label. Now we're going to type correction. We're going to select this node and we'll click Node Label and call it grade. And we'll get into the difference between these two in just a minute. Let's click on the color correction node and let's make some adjustments. We've already added some contrast. Now I want to play with the gamma. Let's adjust the brightness of our midtones a little bit here. Let's bring our shadows down by dragging to the left. And let's take our highlights down a little bit too. That's looking pretty good. Let's use our color boost to introduce more color into the areas that are desaturated. That's looking pretty good. And now this image has been color corrected. It looks natural and clean. Now let's talk about color grading. This is a different step from color correction. This is where we get creative and we add the stylistic look that we want. The easiest and simplest way to color grade an image is to use a preset called a LUT or a lookup table. On the top right of Davinci Resolve, you'll see your LUTs panel. Click on LUTs. In here, you'll have several folders with different types of LUTs. Davinci Resolve comes with a folder called Film Looks. In here, you can select different types of LUTs that you want to apply to your image. By default, they will look way too heavy, way too contrasty, but just look for something that gets the colors that you're looking for out of your image. For this one, I like the Kodak 2383 D55 right here. Let's click this, drag it, put it on the color grade node, and with this node selected, we're going to come to this icon right here. This is called key. Under here, we're going to work on our key output. This allows us to adjust the intensity of all the adjustments on this node. So let's set this to 0.2. This means that all the adjustments on this node will be applied at 20% intensity. Now let's drag this up a little bit more by dragging to the right. Now I'm noticing that our highlights are a little too bright. So I want to come back to our color correction node, and in here, we're going to come back to our color wheels and let's drag down the gain a little bit. That way we bring back some more of that detail in the highlights. Let's drag our gamma to the right to brighten those. Drag down our gain some more, drag up the gamma some more, and drag down the shadows a little bit. This is looking pretty good. Let's start from the beginning. You can click on the number on each node to disable it, and let's disable both of them. This is the original image, very flat and desaturated. We color corrected the image to look natural and normal and clean, and then we added a color grade to add the stylistic look that we wanted. You can go more intense with this, but oftentimes when you're color grading, less is more. Let's copy these adjustments by clicking, dragging, press Command C on a Mac or Control C on a Windows computer, and let's select our next image. Click on it, press Control V on a Windows computer, Command V on a Mac, and we've pasted our adjustments. On our color correction node, we can tell that there's not enough contrast. So we can increase the contrast, or we can just drag our lift down. And now let's disable our color grade. I'm noticing that the colors in the skin and pretty much everything else looks a little bit too blue. The skin doesn't look quite where I want it. So we'll come to our temperature slider and we'll drag to the right to make this a little bit warmer. And we're going to add some magenta so that the skin isn't totally yellow. We've got a little bit of pink in there too. Let's make this warmer. Something like that looks pretty good. Let's drag our shadows down or our lift down a little bit more here. That's looking pretty good. Now let's turn on our color grade by clicking on the number and we can see that that's just a very subtle, stylistic look that we've added to it. This is basic color correction and basic color grading. This can go a lot more advanced, but for the scope of this tutorial, this is as far as we're going to take it. Now, one thing that I do want to cover is image restoration. This may happen where you get your image and it looks totally wrong. It was shot with the wrong settings in camera. It looks super blue. So we're going to need to restore the color in this image. This is where we're going to be using what are called color curves. Click on this curve icon right here. Now up at the top right here, we've got our white point, which is pure white. And at the bottom left, we've got our black point, which is pure black. Around here, we've got our shadows. Around here, we've got our midtones. And around here, we've got our highlights. This curve right here, this white curve, allows us to adjust the overall brightness and darkness of the image. We can create a point by clicking and dragging on the curve. We can right click that point to reset it. And then we can drag our shadows down and our highlights up to create contrast. This is a more advanced way to create contrast, but this gives you a lot more control than just a simple contrast slider. Now let's focus on what we've got down here. This is our histogram. We can drag our black point just until it touches that histogram to set our black point properly. Now our blacks are looking where they should, but we can see that the colors still look very unnatural and blue. Let's just add a little bit of contrast to get the image looking where it should. Now right here under this area where you see YRGB, we're going to click this chain link to break them. And now we can click on red, green, and blue. This allows us to introduce or subtract red from our image, introduce or subtract green from the image, and introduce or subtract blue from the image. The opposite of blue is yellow, and we can see in this image there is quite a bit of blue. Now, we don't want to make any curve adjustments on this node since we've already added contrast. Let's create a new node, Option S on the keyboard on a Mac, Alt S on Windows, and we can see our curves right here are reset back to normal. So now it's time to correct the colors in the image. Let's subtract blue by pulling down somewhere around there. Let's come to our green curve. Let's subtract green from the image just a little bit. Let's come to red. Let's play around with our red a little bit here. Let's take some more blue out of the image. Let's take some green out of those highlights. Let's drag this up a little bit here. Pull that down. Now we can already tell we've come a long way. Let's turn off this node. Let's turn it back on. We're recovering quite a bit of those colors. We've done a lot of the heavy lifting using our curves. Now let's come back to our color wheels. Let's increase the saturation quite a bit just to see where our colors are sitting. We would never actually do this and call it good. We're just increasing the saturation to see what colors are still in our image. Now let's see if we can use the temperature slider and make it a little bit warmer. We're going to drag to the left on our tint dial just so that we can add a little bit more green. That's looking a lot better. We'll come back to saturation, set it to 50, and let's drag up a little bit. That's looking a lot better. Now this isn't perfect. We can see that there's still some purple in the shirt that should be more of a teal blue. And we can see that the skin tones don't quite look right and there might be a little bit of green in the sky. We can work on this some more in more advanced color correction, or we can hide this in our color grade. Let's label this node contrast. We'll label this node color balance. And let's create a new node by pressing Option S on Mac, Alt S on a Windows computer, and let's color grade this to hide some of these imperfections. Let's scroll through our LUTs real quick, see which ones we like. You can hover over them to see how it would impact your image. I'm liking this Kodak 2383 D55. Let's drag that onto node 3, and let's reduce the intensity of this node. Come over to our key panel right here, and we'll just click and drag all the way down, and we'll just drag to the right a little bit to introduce this LUT a little bit here. I'm thinking somewhere around 450 looks pretty good. We'll just leave it right there. That looks pretty good. Let's come back to our color wheels, to our offset, and let's brighten up the image. Something like that looks pretty good. Again, this isn't perfect, but let's reset all of our adjustments to see where we've come from. Right here, we can see that we started with a very blue, low contrasty, desaturated image. We adjusted our contrast in this node. We used this node to balance out the colors and correct our white balance so that our whites looked white and our skin tones looked accurate. And then we used this node to hide some of the imperfections that persisted by using some color grading. And we'll go ahead and label this one grade. Now you can come up with your own color grading presets, but for the scope of this tutorial, we'll just use the ones built into Davinci Resolve. All right, now there's a lot more we could go into in terms of color correction and color grading and creating your own unique looks, but for the purposes of this tutorial and the projects you'll be working on, this should give you enough information to simply and quickly color correct and color grade your video projects. If you have any further questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to help, and I will see you guys later. This is Studio McKay.